What an honor and blessing it is to read your toes today. So let's have a look at the top messages that your toes are wanting you to know and that are communicating with you. And when we do the toe reading, your right foot represents what is happening outside of you. It's the way that you interact with the world, the way that others experience you. And your left foot is your internal self, the way that you speak to yourself and interact with yourself, and your connection with Source. And then each of the toes has their own energy. Your left big toe is your spirit path, your right big toe is your life path. And then your second toes on both feet are communication, external communication, internal communication, action, relationships, and trust and prosperity. And so when we look at your toes, when I was preparing for this reading and looking at your toes, there were a couple of things that stood out really, really strongly to me. And they have to do with this first toe. So if you look at this first toe, it is straightforward from the base of the foot here. It is solid, it is planted. So you are a person, you probably have been called stubborn before. You stand your ground and you're okay doing that alone. So you are a born leader. People, you will just do your thing. You'll do what you think is right. And the consequences around, as far as the way that others receive you, that is of secondary consequence to you being in integrity with you. And in your life path, you are on the right life path for you right now. We can see this because your big toenail is nice and straight. It's straightforward. It's not really leaning. It's leaning a slight bit towards the future. When toes look to the little toes, it's the future looking, but definitely not very much. And so whatever you're doing in your life path right now, stay with it. And then watch this toe. If this toe starts to change, the changes always happen in the nails first. And so if this starts to change, like if it starts to turn, or if this toe starts to move in that way, then that's your toes letting you know that it's time to change something in your life path that you're doing. So just stand your ground, continue to do that. And that is a gift. That's a gift to you. In your spirit path, same things here. It's solid, it's standing there, and you're okay in your spirit path, in your connection with Source. And what happens around you is of little consequence, because you know that if you follow what is right for you, which is what you're doing right now, you're okay. This toe is looking a little bit more to the future than this toe, if you just look for context. But nothing, like if I was to look at these toes just in a flash reading or whatever, I would say, okay, what you're doing in your life path and what you're doing in your spirit path is working for you right now. So stay with it. Now, the shadow side to that can be that when it's time to shift and move, and that's just a part of life, that's the only thing we can depend on is change, is that you won't do it because you're stuck. So that is something that can happen. Oh, just a minute. When I have a physical response, a sneeze, a yawn, it is a release of energy, and it is your energy that I'm feeling right now. So please pay attention to that last thing, which is when it is time to be flexible, when it is time to make a change, to pivot, just like when you're walking on a path, you're hiking, your feet and your ankles, they move around with the rocks as you are walking. That's the beautiful thing about our ankle joints and our feet. They are adaptable and flexible according to the terrain. Use that analogy in your life as you move through different terrain of your life, if you will. It may require some change and some flexibility. What works for you now may not work for you in 20 years without some slight adjustments. Another analogy is just like with our children. When they're really young, they require a lot more guidance. And then as they get older, we shift and change with that. And so just remember that just because it was right for you at one point doesn't mean it's right for you always. And this can be a job, this can be a family situation, this can be a way of believing. It can be any and all of those things. And we'll talk more about that as we get into these other toes. But if there was a huge message from your toes, that is one of them. To what you're doing is working now, fantastic. And just realize that it may not work for you in 20 years. It could, but it may not. And to be flexible with that. When you look at these toes, if you start to observe some changes, you know where to find me. We can interpret that at that time. But just watch these toes. These toes are going to communicate well with you. The next most prominent feature in your toes is this large space between your first and second toes. And so we already talked about how those big first toes standing straight and tall and on their own is a beautiful thing. This large space here, there's a couple of things. So the light side of this is you are highly intuitive. So I would invite you to pay attention to how you feel your intuition. Is it a feeling that you get? Is it something that shows up in your mind? Is it something that you can sense somewhere in your body? Do you see it? How does your intuition speak to you? Pay attention to that because you have excellent intuition. This also, this space and how it's a little square here in the bottom, this is the leadership toe because you are a leader. You are absolutely standing and a person that people can follow if they choose. Now, the question is will people naturally follow you because you're a natural leader? Will people naturally follow you? Or is it a leadership where you are established as the leader, whether that's through some hierarchical means in your career or within your social groups, that you are set up as a leader. And so people follow you because you do have this natural leadership. I would guess from your toes, I would theorize from looking at your toes that is the case. When you are set up as the leader, people follow you. If you're not set up as the leader, you are still a leader. You are still independent, but sometimes you don't have followers. And there's nothing wrong with that either way. That is just information so that if you are in a position of leadership, I'm thinking in your career, whatever that career may be, if it's including if it's being a stay-at-home mom, you are the established leader of your household with your group. So by way of information, also leaders who are natural leaders and need to have that established authority, just be aware of your relationship with authority, both your own authority and the way that you look to the authority of others. And just be aware of that. Are you following another leader who's established as a leader because you want to, or because you think that it's the right thing to do, or because your intuition has guided you towards that? So just paying attention to that. And then in situations where you are the leader, taking steps to be established as a leader. And that shows up primarily in followers. First followers are also leaders. And so I think that is going to be and has been a big part of your life, is being a first follower. Because where you choose to go is where you think is the right place to go. and then people will follow you. I hope that made sense. I feel like we kind of went in a circle around that. But just ponder on leadership, and we can always talk later if you have additional questions. But I would definitely watch some TED Talks and read some books about leadership and leadership styles, and start to identify where the type of leader that you want to be and what it looks like to be that leader. And then identify leaders in your life. What inspires you to follow them? And examine your relationship with authority. Because the shadow side of this can be such an independent spirit that you absolutely will not follow authority of any kind. And the idea of authority creates a rebellious sense in you. And if you're not experiencing this now, that's totally fine. Sometimes it takes us later on in our years before we just realize that authority is not working for us. And so just being aware of that. These are just simply points to be aware of. And this relationship with authority, I would invite you to journal about that. How has this shown up in your life, and how does it show up for you now? And also claiming authority. Boy, this word authority just keeps coming up. Claiming authority. What are you an authority in? And please remember that the most important definition of authority is author. You see that word in the word authority, author of your own life. You are indeed the author of your own life, and having someone outside of you tell you how to live your life in any way is not going to work for you. So I invite you to examine that. Because there is this significant space between your first and the rest of your toes, this is another reason why this idea of being established as the leader is important for you in your leadership. In order to be an effective leader, having that established leadership is going to make your leadership journey more rewarding and easier. All right, next, toes. These second toes, these are your communication and expression toes. All right, now what I find interesting is when we look at these toes, again, for context, this toe is leaning out, whereas this toe is more parallel with this first toe. So let's talk about what that means. This is in your communication and in your expression with the outside world. How are you expressing in the outside world, and how do other people receive you? And so having a look at, are they aligned? Is the way that you are expressing and communicating aligned with who you are, your soul self? Or are you following a rule book that may or may not work for you, but you have fear around not following that rule book? And what is that rule book? What does that look like? And what rules in that rule book work for you? Because clearly some of them are. But some of them are not, because this toe is leaning here to the future and leaning away from this toe. So in fact, the way that you are communicating and expressing in the world might be different than your soul self. So how could this show up? If people sometimes say to you things like, you're nothing like I thought you would be like, or now that I've gotten to know you, I have a different opinion about you, or following the rules for rules' sake is the phrase that keeps coming into my mind in the way that you express. So when you are communicating and expressing, and as a leader, just think about, how sometimes when parents or teachers, when kids are like, well, why do I need to do that? And the parent or teacher will be like, well, because I told you so. Whether or not that's an experience in your life, if it is, I would definitely do some journaling about that. But looking at that attitude, well, you do it because it's the leader. Just examine that attitude and where that's working for you and where it's not working for you in the things that you speak and in the way that you express. So expression is your body language, the way and what you say, and all those different forms of communication. All right, and on this foot, this second communication toe is straighter. So there is more internal alignment. And so this is where doing that journaling work is going to be interesting. Whereas this is in the outside world, internally, you are aligned. You do have some blocked energy in this toe. And this really from very, very young, because time tracks in the toes, this is the farthest from your current point in this linear timeline, and this is the most recent, which is why I said watch your toenails. That's where the change will happen first. So this happened very, very young, possibly even before you were born, in the womb. Some blocked energy in the way that you express and communicate. Further, about halfway point in your life, so however old you are now, just subtract half of the number of years you've been on the planet from that, and think about what was happening then. And then if you look at the narrowing and the different way, so if we look at this toenail is flat. So when you communicate with people, you can be experienced perhaps as being very blunt and straightforward, which I think is a wonderful thing, especially for women, because that's not what we have been taught to do. And I'd be curious to know what your communication style is, because that's how people may be experiencing you. Whereas on this foot, we see that it's more round, it's pointed, but it's also narrower. And so I would invite you to consider where you may be shutting down communication with yourself and with source. When you, or if you speak to a higher power, what does that look like? Is it prescriptive? Is it an open flowing communication? Do you follow a set of guidelines or rules? I say this because there's been a lot of information put out there about, the law of attraction. I'll just use as an example. And to invoke the law of attraction, you want to say things in a certain way because we don't want to be negative. We want to speak as if we've already had it. So there's just all this stuff. So what it's really become is this prescriptive set of rules for how we speak to our higher power, which there is definitely some merit to that kind of speaking. I don't want to take away from that. There's always merit to a prescriptive type of teaching. I'm thinking about recitation type prayers. That can be extraordinarily meditative to have a recitation type prayer. But again, that communication is restricted. And so however you are communicating with source, just think about, is it prescriptive, and how can you expand that communication? And then I would recommend gently massaging these toes, because you do have some blocked energy in here. There are some things inside of you that want to be released, especially, some of this generational or things that happened before you were born, and things that happened probably when you were a teenager. And a teenager, I would say 15 to 20. 15 to 20 is the time range that I'm getting here. So journaling about that, and in what ways. This can also look like I can't fully express myself because that will make other people uncomfortable, or because I need to take responsibility. You are a highly responsible taking person. And I would ask you to, or invite you to consider, do you take on responsibility for other people when it's not your responsibility? And do you attempt emotional management of people because you are uncomfortable with their expression of self? Because if you're doing that with others, you're definitely doing it with yourself. And that might be an easier way for you to see the way that you are not fully expressing yet. And the way that you are expressing is in alignment with your spirit path. There could just be a greater expression of that. Okay, your action toes. So you are an action taker. We can see this because these toes are nice and straight. There is some blocked energy on both of these toes. So what are some actions that you would really like to take? What are some things that you would really like to do? Something that's coming to my mind, or what are some books that you would really like to read? What is some kind of a vacation or a club to join, or just what are some actions that you want to take that align with you and that you're not doing right now? And there could be a variety of reasons with that. Time is one, life circumstance. So there's lots of reasons why we're not taking action on the things that we want to. And because there is some blocked energy, especially in this toe, which would be action for self, I'm guessing that you take a lot of action for others and on behalf of others, and because other people are needing it, expecting it, etc. And so, and that's right now honestly working for you because you have very little blocked energy in this toe. When that becomes, or if that becomes the kind of thing where you're saying yes when you really mean no, and you're not taking important self-care and self-benefiting action for yourself. And this can look like something as simple as taking a bath with the door closed and no one gets to disturb you, or taking a vacation for yourself, or sitting down and reading for 15 minutes a day, or learning a foreign language, whatever feels good to you. Start taking small actions on those things, especially for self-care. And consider, what are you saying yes to when you really mean to say no, or when you really want to say no? And why? Does it have to do with authority or with responsibility taking when it's not actually your responsibility? But keep taking action, keep showing up. That's a very strong point for you. Your relationships are really important to you. We can see this because the nail is very straight. These toes are straight. Relationships are your lifeblood. And so another journal prompt would be, as you're standing in your own power, as you're standing, feeling you're willing to stand on your own, even if others don't follow you. But what you really want are these relationships of equality. I think this is why authority kept coming into mind earlier. What you really want is relationships of equality. So take a little inventory of your relationships. What relationships feel equal, feel balanced, feel harmonious, feel like there's this beautiful, circle of giving and receiving, and they're mutually benefiting relationships. And what relationships aren't that way? And then look at those relationships and see what you can do, because you're this action taker, and how you can express and communicate to create a more equal and harmonious relationship. And if that's not the case, perhaps that's not a close relationship for you. So just some things to think about with that. But keep going with your relationships. Work on your relationships. That's going to bring you a great deal of happiness in your life. And last, we look at your trust and prosperity toes. So they're both trust and prosperity. You trust yourself. We can see this in both these big toes and in this toe. You do trust yourself. That's beautiful. keep trusting yourself. And I really invite you to consider the questions from this reading as part of this journey of trusting yourself. And the statement, I do the right thing even when it's hard, that probably resonates for you. And you also probably went back and maybe felt some guilt or shame about times when you haven't done what was right, whether it was hard or not. And I just invite you to forgive yourself for that, because nobody does the right thing all the time. And when I say right, please know I'm putting that in quotation marks, because if there's places and times in your life where you feel like you didn't do the right thing, I would invite you to go back and look and see how that served you. Ooh. That's an important one for you. I just had that energetic release. That's an important one for you. So just consider doing that. Now, when we look at this toe, trust is kind of a big thing. This has to do with some of this expression, communication you've got going on in this toe. Who can you trust? Why do you trust them? Do you keep trusting someone when they've shown you that they cannot be trusted? Do you trust someone because that's what you think that you should do, or because they've actually earned your trust? These are questions to ask yourself, because you have been burned. You have trusted and then been burned. And I also invite you to consider that the lifetime cost of not trusting people is much greater than the lifetime cost of trusting people and getting hurt sometimes. You're going to get hurt no matter what, because that's just part of life. Trusting people, especially people that have earned your trust, is important. I don't know what level of cynicism shows up in your life around trusting people, or maybe it's just people of a certain demographic of some kind. And I don't mean that humans inherently distrust people who are not like them. That's just, old evolutionary stuff that hangs around. But looking at who do you easily give your trust to, and who requires more proving of their trustworthiness, and then analyzing that. Is that true? Because you've been burned. And I would invite you to gently massage this toe. Just if this is the toe, just gently massage with your fingers this toe. And you can ask some of these questions. Where am I putting my trust? Where it's been an earned trust, and where my intuition is letting me know that that's a place that will be for highest and best good for both of us, where I've put my trust there. And where am I putting my trust where it is not deserved? That's some good questions for this trust toe. Because out of all of your toes, this trust toe was also, this toe's message was the loudest. Okay, we're going to jump over here to your chart and just talk about where some of these things are showing up in your astrological chart. So this is a map of the sky on the moment you were born. Okay. And this would change. Like if you lived in Australia, the sky would obviously look different. If you lived, just a little bit farther north or south, the sky would look different. But this was the map in the sky when you were born, where you were born. Now, when I always love looking at these charts, and for some reason I've waited until now to really look at this chart after I've done your toe reading, as opposed to doing it at the same time. And I want to just show you in this map of the sky that is a map indeed of your life, of the things that we came in. I think this is just such a gift from God that we have access to this map, that we were born at this certain time and in this certain place, and we have this map that can help guide us. And so let's start here with this bold line right here. This is called your rising sign. So this is where the sun was on the eastern horizon when you were born. It was in the sign of Libra. And remember what I said about these relationship toes and about authority? Libra loves balance. Libra loves harmony. Libra loves peace. And that's how you want to move through this world. Your rising sign is how you move through the world, and it is also how people experience you. And so these relationships of equality, harmony, those are very, very important in your life. So going back to the relationship toe, confirmed by the star map. So if you're ever in a conversation, people want to know what your sun, moon, and rising sign are. Your rising sign is beautiful Libra. Now you've got a lot of Scorpio energy here in your first and second houses of your chart. So Scorpio is, it's a sign that is about power. And I mean, it's about other things too, but just tying this in with your toes, that discussion at the very beginning of this reading about authority, that's power dynamics. So you've got Libra here that loves all this equality, and then you've got all this Scorpio energy that's about power. And your North Node, okay, this is the area that you stretch into in this life, and claiming your own authority and working on your relationship with authority. I'm using the word authority, which isn't necessarily a Scorpio thing, but I use the word authority because it does have to do with power. So really looking at these power dynamics, this is part of what you are here to do. This is a big part of your values. The valuing of structures and finding ways to create these relationships of equality. And I would invite you, and this is a hard question to ponder, but I would invite you to look at where you're placing judgments. That's coming in strong. Where are you judging? And realize that where you're judging others is also where you're judging yourself. And where you judge yourself is where you judge others. So if you make a judgment statement, even in just your mind about yourself or someone, what is that about? Find those themes. All right. Your sun, as you probably already knew, is in Cancer, and so is your moon, and so is your midheaven. Cancer is the crab. Cancer, or the crab, if you have seen crabs, they scoot sideways across a beach. They really want to avoid conflict, which goes along really, really well with your Libra energy here. They want to avoid conflict. But what happens if you push a crab too far? Those pincers come out. So it's very important for you to not let yourself get, quote unquote, pushed too far. Because that's when this action toe is going to come out. That's when this blunt communication is going to come out. And it's not going to feel good. But because you have this beautiful, soft, feminine Cancer energy and moon, the moon rules Cancer. The moon is your non-negotiable needs. You need safe space. And you are a creator of that. Look around at the safe spaces of the community that you have created or been a part of. This has to do with these safe relationships. So just paying attention to that with your sun and your moon both in Cancer. I I'm just going to read a couple of words from this book about Cancer. And I want you to just embrace these as your superpowers. Okay. Cancers are deep feelers. And here's just some words: kindness, acceptance, nurturing, compassion, tolerance, femininity, gentleness. And then the shadow side of Cancer can be enabling behaviors, rescuing people. This goes back to that responsibility. And your desires are to create safe space for people and to be with family and friends. Security is really important to you. And so this has to do with this trust toe. You've been in situations and relationships where you did not feel safe. So let's release that old energy. Release that old energy of not feeling safe and embrace the fact that you are actually the creator of the safe space. Okay. You probably get a lot of joy from your spiritual practices. And just be aware that there is a tendency towards rigidity in spiritual practice. There's not anything necessarily wrong with that. Just it goes back to that: are you following the rule because somebody told you that you should, or because you think that it's the right thing to do? You being an independent and sovereign human being is really important. And if you feel pushed into a corner at all, the pincers are going to come out from Cancer the crab. So just feel your feels. You feel really deeply, and that's a beautiful thing. You've got a lot of water energy in your chart, and that water is a deep feeler, and it can be intense for you and for the people around you. Allow yourself to feel that. Just a couple of other points in your chart. You've got Mars in Gemini and your Mercury in Gemini. And these are, Gemini is a thinking, it's a faster moving sign. And so just being aware, Mercury is the communicator. Okay, Mercury is about expression. And Mercury is also showing up as the latest degree in your chart. And so the way that you communicate is really important in your life. Communicate and express. And your Mars is in Gemini. So if you ever judge yourself for being too scattered or feel stuck when you're like following a list, just consider how, so this could be a place where there's some authority. Our culture is full of like, make these lists, make these to-do lists. Maybe that doesn't work for you. Maybe it does, but the lists seem all over. When you're, let's just say, I'm going to choose a mundane task. When you're making breakfast in the morning, how do you do that? Like, do you sit down with the pancakes and you're making the pancakes and then you move and you make the orange juice or, whatever it happens to be? Or do you do a little bit here and then you move over here and you're all over? So just understanding what is natural for you. And if the word should comes up, oh, I should do it this way. I should stay focused on this. Just realize that whenever we use that word should, it's because there's a rule that has been imposed upon us and that we have accepted at some level, but we have not really accepted deep into our souls. So just pay attention to when you think or say the word should. Your Venus is here in Leo, and so being seen in your relationships, and you are probably good at seeing people in relationships. So just let that be seen. Your relationships and your ability to feel, you're probably pretty empathic. Those are your superpowers. And indeed, that is how you will fulfill your purpose in this lifetime. So just two other things in your chart. You see that you've got this Libra sign 2 times. Again, this goes into this place of relationships and equality and harmony and balance and peace. And then you've got these 2 going into the sign of Aries. This is about that action, and your action toe is healthy. Again, just considering those prompts from earlier in the reading. Please reach out to me if you have any questions at all. I realize that your chart, could take a lifetime to understand. Indeed, that's the purpose of the chart. And we just hit a few places that I love the confirmation when what's happening in the toes shows up in your chart. And I think of the star chart as the map of your life, and your toes indicating where you are right now. And that's the power of the toes, is they are the first messengers. So watch them. And when you see changes, ask what those are about, and reach out to me if that feels right to you. Thank you so much for this opportunity.